They laughed at him, calling him a beggar with no future. But when he touched her car that night, no one imagined that by the next morning a limousine would be parked in front of his house. The sound of laughter echoed along the roadside, mixed with the cold wind that stirred dust beneath the dim lights of an ancient street lamp. Thomas, in shabby clothes and with grease-stained hands, crouched in front of the luxurious car as if it were yet another challenge in the hard life he already knew well. The young men in the corner shook their heads in amusement, certain nothing would come of it. But Thomas didn't respond. He simply took a deep breath, ran his calloused fingers over the shiny hood, and felt the silence of the sleeping car. The woman inside the car watched silently, her eyes attentive and mysterious. At that moment, no one there knew that this simple night would change their destinies forever. Thomas woke before the sun. The tin roof creaked in the early morning chill, and the whole house creaked when he put his foot on the floor. The old kettle took a while to boil. The flame on the stove was low, almost as tired as he was. In the cup, thin coffee. On his plate, a piece of stale bread, which he dug into without haste. He had learned to chew slowly to stave off hunger. The kitchen table doubled as a workshop bench. On it, a faded canvas case held the last of his tools. Wrenches of various sizes, a worn screwdriver, a pair of pliers with a bent spring, and a multimeter that occasionally worked. He opened the window. The dirt road was damp, and a shaggy dog sniffed at cans silently. Up ahead, a crumpled sign announced, "Opportunity Fair, Sunday." Thomas read it in disbelief, but tucked the time away in his mind. In the corner of the room, a note taped to the wall reminded everyone what mattered. "Pay Mrs. Turner, rent overdue, 2 months." The handwriting was his, firm, as if firmness could produce money. He took a deep breath, folded the note carefully, and tucked it into his pocket, as if carrying the debt on his chest made less noise than having it on the wall. "Good morning, Tom," the neighbor said, opening the wooden gate. It was Liam, a tall teenager with a backward cap and a bicycle without a front brake. "My mum told me not to disturb you, but the chain fell off again." Thomas smiled. He picked up his briefcase, walked to the gate, and knelt. His hands were steady, his eyes patient. "When you tighten it too much, the chain cries out for help. When you loosen it too much, it knocks you down," he said, as he replaced each link. "The secret is to listen to the metal, Liam. You talk about cars as if they were people. People get tired. Cars too. People need respect. Cars too." Liam laughed. Thomas tightened the bolt with the correct wrench, tested it with his finger, and turned the wheel. It worked. "Thanks, Tom. Can I pay you later? Take some bread to your mother and tell her everything's okay. That makes my day." Liam pedaled off, kicking up dust. Thomas, for a moment, saw the reflection of his own face in the bicycle's spokes. Stubble, tired, pale eyes, disheveled hair. He was a man in his 40s who always looked like he'd had less sleep than he needed. Yet there was a stubborn serenity in the way he held things together, like someone refusing to let go of his dignity. At the end of the street, the facade of the old garage where he had worked was now boarded up. The owner, Mr. Collins, had retired without warning and sold everything. Thomas stood outside, staring at the shadow of the sign someone had ripped off. He remembered his first day there, when his father had handed him a wrench and said, "An engine has time and truth. If you respect both, it speaks." His father was no longer there. A silent heart attack had taken him too soon, leaving behind tools and a simple name. Thomas Reed. He headed toward the downtown neighborhood. He passed the auto parts store. The girl behind the counter, Ava, frowned at the battered suitcase. "Thomas, no scrap metal arrived today. Just ask for it. I wish I could help. If you find a used belt, keep it for me. One with a few cuts will do. I'll keep it. By the way," she lowered her voice, "there's a steering wheel with ripped leather. The owner gave up. It's not for sale, but maybe you can replace the leather and earn some commission." Thanks, Ava. I'll stop by later. He left with nothing in his hands, but with a quiet certainty that something would eventually turn up. It almost always did. Sometimes it was repairing an old radio in Mr. Owens's barber shop. Other times, a generator that had failed in the church hall. Most of it was work paid for with gratitude and cornmeal cake. Money, not much, but it was that or silence. Mid-morning, the cracked screen phone vibrated. A message from Jake, the owner of a tow truck. "Jake, Tom, do you need help? I picked up a car at kilometer 17. It's a tough customer. If you need a job, give me a call." Thomas called. "Jake, I'm in. Where are you?" "In the yard, in half an hour. But I'm warning you, this guy is the kind of guy who wants miracles for the price of a fortune. Miracles are not my thing. I do what metal allows. That's why I called you, man. You speak metal better than I speak people." Thomas laughed, put away his phone, and continued walking. In the square, he sat on the bench, opened the paper package containing a cold pastry he'd received from Donna Ruth at the grocery store. He ate, watching the pigeons fight over crumbs. The world seemed to operate with a strange efficiency. Those with much didn't notice. Those with little counted every gesture. He remembered when he counted hours, not pennies, when a paycheck came every month as a certainty. It didn't last. A series of misfortunes, his mother's illness, the closing of the shop, the pandemic that took away customers and hope, shaped the present. That afternoon, Thomas went to Jake's yard. The problem car was an imported sedan, its electronics module blinking like a Christmas tree. "The owner's over there in a suit," Jake whispered. "He says he read on a forum that you can reset everything with a paperclip." "Forums often forget that cars aren't cartoons," said Thomas, opening the hood. The man in the suit approached. "Will it take long? I have a meeting." "It depends on what the car decides to tell me," Thomas replied calmly. In 20 minutes he isolated the problem, a blown fuse and a bad ground connection. He explained it without jargon. The man snorted when he heard the price. "For that price I can buy a new kit online." "Buy it, but it doesn't install itself." Jake held back a laugh. The man, annoyed, paid. When he got into the car, he didn't thank him. Thomas watched the sedan leave and rested his body on a wooden bench. "You should charge more when the guy comes in a suit," Jake said. "The tie isn't the problem, the rush is." "What about hunger?" Jake looked at his hands. "Are you eating well?" "Like slowly. It deceives better." It was getting dark when Thomas hit the road again. He preferred to walk, even though he was tired. The wind was clear, the darkness was slow, the sporadic headlights created streaks of light on the road. To the left, a billboard glowed with a photo of an elegant woman beside a luxury car. "Heart Automotive, engineering that feels." Thomas read the sentence and smiled wryly. Engineering that feels. It sounded like a joke and a promise at the same time. At kilometer 12, a car stopped on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. Two young men leaned against the guardrail, laughing, looking at their phones. Inside, a woman was trying to call someone. Thomas clutched his briefcase to his chest. Night had a way of offering choices. "Hey man," one of the guys said, seeing him approach. "No need, they already called a tow truck. That won't even work with prayer." "Can I at least look?" Thomas asked, his voice low. "You?" The other man scrutinized his clothes with disdain. "Are you kidding? You're going to get that grease all over the car." The driver's window rolled down a bit. Eyes were alert, lined with fatigue. The woman's voice came out clear but cautious. "Do you understand engines?" Thomas nodded. "I understand by listening." The boys laughed louder. One of them waved his cell phone in the air, like someone filming a comedy. "The Mechanical Beggar, Part 1, he mocked. "Go, hero, show me your trick." Thomas didn't argue. He placed the case on the floor carefully, like someone laying down an old book. He opened it, choosing the key by memory of its weight, not its engraved number. He knelt, took a breath, and placed his palm against the hood as if asking permission. The metal was still warm, like a tired animal. "The name's Thomas," he said, without looking up. "If this goes wrong, I'll pack my things and leave. If it goes right, you just stop laughing." A brief silence. The woman nodded almost imperceptibly. The wind carried the scent of damp grass. In the distance, a truck passed slowly, as if unwilling to disturb him. Thomas turned on the small flashlight attached to a rubber band, heard the thin click of a relay, felt the vibrancy of the air. Everything inside him settled into an ancient calm. At the side of the road, beneath the lone streetlight, the laughter faded to whispers. Thomas turned the first nut, then the second. The night watched patiently. And there, on the border between exhaustion and faith, he began to talk to the machine. The engine coughed once, then again, and finally woke with a low roar. The vibration rippled through the hood like an animal catching its breath after nearly drowning. Thomas took a step back, wiping his sweaty palm on his worn pants. The boys, previously laughing loudly, fell silent. The woman turned the key again. The car responded firmly without fail. She kept her hands on the wheel for a few seconds, glancing in the rearview mirror at the man crouched in front. Something in his expression softened, but without losing its caution. "I don't know what you did," he said, rolling down the window. "But it worked." Thomas shrugged, closing the case with a metallic click. The car just needed to be heard. The boys looked at each other, still in disbelief, and walked off cursing toward the bar on the corner of the road. One of them was filming the whole thing, but now with less enthusiasm. The woman turned off the engine for a moment, as if testing her confidence in the machine. She turned it back on, and the car responded without hesitation. She leaned her arm on the window and watched him with eyes that reflected the dashboard's shine. "Do you work in any workshop here?" "Not anymore," Thomas said. "I do whatever comes my way. A stalled car, a loose chain, sometimes an old radio." She nodded slowly, as if processing more than the words. She glanced at her watch, sighed, and then opened the door. She got out firmly. She wore low heels, a dark skirt, and a light coat, suitable for someone not accustomed to waiting long on the side of the road. "Need a ride?" she asked, adjusting the strap of her bag. Thomas considered refusing. He was used to walking home, counting steps in the silence of the night. But there was something in the way she looked at him, as if she wanted to prolong this conversation. "Just to the next avenue." His voice was calm, but there was a caution in it, as if he were accepting an invitation that was greater than it seemed. Inside the car, the contrast struck him. Soft leather, the subtle scent of perfume, the shiny dashboard. It wasn't an environment for calloused hands. He kept his briefcase between his feet, sitting rigidly, wary of touching anything. The woman drove in silence for a few minutes, focused. The sound of the engine, now steady, seemed louder than any words. "What's your name?" she asked suddenly. "Thomas." "Thomas," she repeated, as if testing the sound. "Thank you." He inclined his head in acknowledgement. After a few seconds, he returned the question. "And you?" She hesitated. She gripped the steering wheel a little tighter before answering. "Claire." The name hung in the air. Simple, yet charged with mystery, as if it hid an entire world behind it. "Claire, you should get that car checked," Thomas said. "You can't rely on luck alone." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Luck has never been my guide." Then he fell silent, as if he had said more than he would have liked. They passed through the gate of a brightly lit property. Uniformed guards watched the car enter, but Claire didn't stop. She simply slowed down to be recognized. Thomas noticed the security guard's eyes turning to him, surprised by his presence in the passenger seat. She parked near a well-kept garden, turned off the engine, and turned to him. "Is this okay for you?" Thomas looked out the window. The side gate opened onto a familiar avenue. From there, in half an hour's walk, he would be home. "Yes, it is." He opened the door slowly, but before he left, Claire held out her hand. Inside was a folded note. "For your time." Thomas stared at her, his eyes steady. "It wasn't for money," she insisted. "Then accept it as a token of gratitude." There was a heavy silence. Finally he took the note, but didn't put it away. He simply closed his fingers around it, not looking at the denomination. "Good evening, Claire." "Good evening, Thomas." He got out, closing the door carefully. The car pulled away smoothly and disappeared around the bend in the road. Thomas stood there for a few seconds, feeling the cold wind blow on his face. When he opened his hand, he saw it wasn't just a note. There was a white card with a name printed in discreet letters, Claire Hart. Hart Automotive. The elegant handwriting seemed at odds with everything he knew. He tucked the card into his shirt pocket next to the rental note. 2 pieces of paper, 2 possible destinations beating in unison against his chest. The walk home was silent. Each step seemed heavier than the last. When he entered, he turned on the dim lamp and left his briefcase in the corner. The table was as usual, but the card glowed in his memory brighter than any lamp. He placed the note in the coin jar, the survival jar, and the card on the table, separate, like something that didn't belong in this world. He sat down, rubbed his grease-stained hands, and laughed to himself, a short, almost incredulous laugh. "Hart Automotive," he muttered. "What the hell am I going to do with this?" Outside, the street was asleep, but inside, something had awakened. Thomas awoke to a noise unlike his usual. It wasn't the creak of tin or the whistling of wind through the cracks. It was a low, subdued engine, like a large feline waiting for orders. Morning light leaked through the edges of the curtain as a chrome reflection crossed the wall. He stood slowly, stepping on the floorboards that groaned under his weight, and opened the front door. The dirt road, usually filled with bicycles, wheelbarrows, and running children, now sheltered a long black limousine, fitted like a streak of ink on rough paper. From the back seat, the door opened with clockwork precision. Claire got out first, wearing sunglasses, a light-colored coat, a curt gesture as she adjusted her sleeve. Then the driver, a large man with a neatly trimmed beard and black gloves, walked around the car and stood a step behind her, like an obedient shadow. Neighbors appeared at the windows. Mrs. Ruth from the grocery store stuck her hairpin in her open mouth. Liam, wearing flip-flops and no cap, pedaled up to the front, as if the bike might be an invitation. The bearded dog barked at his own mirror in the chrome bumper. "Good morning, Thomas," Claire said, taking off her glasses. Her eyes were the same as the night before, alert, but less tired now. "May I come in?" He nodded, opening the door wider. The humble room shrank to welcome her. Claire took it all in leisurely. Her father's antique painting next to an out-of-date calendar, the canvas briefcase in the corner, the jar of coins on the table with her card on top. "I like the silence here," he said, pulling up a chair. "It's an honest silence," Thomas replied with a half-smile. The driver remained outside, arms crossed, staring at the street. "I owe you more than a thank you," she continued. "Last night, I was returning from a technical visit. My car failed due to a damn coincidence of factors. You isolated the right noise, and you did it, like someone who listens to people." She took an envelope from her purse. It wasn't thick. It didn't look like money. She placed it on the table next to the card. "This is an invitation. Today at 11 we'll be testing a prototype. Big people, investors in a hurry, sleepless engineers, journalists sniffing for headlines. The engine isn't talking to us like it should. I want you there. Not by luck, by method." Thomas touched the envelope with his fingertip, as if it were fragile. He turned his eyes to her. "Why me? Because I don't need another one who knows the manual. I need someone who still knows how to listen." He fell silent. The wall clock ticked for 2 long seconds. Outside, Liam cleared his throat. "If it's a no, I understand," Claire said without drama. But if it's a yes, the limo is here. Thomas looked at the battered suitcase. He thought of the rental note in the pocket. He thought of his father, of the quote about time and the truth of engines. Finally, he nodded. I go. The road to the Hart Automotive Complex looked like another view from inside a car that swallowed potholes like shadows. Thomas held his briefcase in his lap. Claire typed quick messages, but sometimes fell silent, and watched the countryside pass by. The driver didn't speak. Through the window, billboards advertised shiny cars, tires that promised to embrace the world, brilliant service. The limousine entered through a high gate. Cameras followed. Guards gave a curt nod of acknowledgement. The yard was wide, streaked with yellow stripes, scented with fresh oil. In the glass hall, a man in a grey suit was waiting for them. His shoulders were rigid, his smile polished like metal. His name tag read Victor Hale, Director of Engineering. Good morning, Claire, he said, adjusting his tie. The investors have arrived. We have 15 minutes. Victor's eyes fell on Thomas. They took in the briefcase, the worn pants, the scarred hands. His smile diminished by 0.5 millimeter. And you are? Thomas, Claire replied before he could continue. Consultant, come with me to bench 5. Victor hesitated for the length of a sigh. Stand 5 is where our problem is, he said in a tone that tried to be neutral. And also where our photographers are. Perfect, Claire said. That way, when the problem becomes a solution, we'll have an angle. Victor wasn't pleased, but he stuffed his annoyance into an inner pocket. He led them down a glass corridor. Through it, a laboratory vibrating with white light could be seen. Robotic arms, motionless as bronze forks, wheelless carts, suspended, revealing underbellies of cable and steel. Technicians in lab coats passing by like silent birds. On bench 5, the prototype looked like a sea creature out of water. Modules open, cables exposed, a collection of parts forming a body still searching for a heart. Screens showed jittery graphs, lines rising and falling in spasms. Intermittent problem in the thermal control module, Victor said, pointing. At high load, the system reads a non-existent peak and triggers protection. It drops the torque. If we persist, it drops everything. Have you tested redundant sensors? Claire asked. 3 times. We've already changed. We've already isolated. We've already prayed, replied an engineer with a tight bun, Emily Shaw, without taking your eyes off the screen. Thomas approached unhurriedly. He didn't touch. He just stood there, half-paced. The noise in the room subsided, as if curiosity had given way. Can I? He asked, lifting the suitcase slightly. Victor made a gesture that was almost a no, but Claire said yes, without looking at him. Thomas placed the case on the counter in a free corner. He opened it. The contrast cut through the air, old but clean tools, lovingly lined up. He took the flashlight tied with an elastic band, the same one from the side of the road, and stuck it in his pocket. Then he leaned in as if listening to a secret near the mouth of a sick person. When they activate the protection, is there a noise? He asked, still without touching. Sub-bass at 60 hertz for 2 to 3 seconds, Emily replied. And before that, a dry click, like an anxious relay. Thomas nodded. The sound painted a picture inside him. He opened a small roll of electrical tape and tested it between his fingers, as if measuring an ancient distance. Can I see the thermal module's grounding grid? Victor sighed. We've already replaced it 3 times. Can I see? Thomas repeated patiently. Emily opened the lid of a compartment. Inside, a braided mesh connected metal points. Everything looked right, up to a point. Thomas ran his finger, not to check, but to feel. He stopped at a curve in the mesh. His finger found a screw slightly shorter than it should have been. There's a short circuit that isn't electrical. It's a warning light, he said, without irony. What's up? Victor frowned. This screw doesn't reach deep enough when the assembly expands with heat. The grounding partially loses contact, the sensor screams, the module panics and drops everything. The blame falls on the censor, but it's just the scream. The pain is here. Emily looked at the screen, then at the piece, then at Thomas. She opened a tray and selected a screw 2 millimeters longer. "That doesn't explain the noise at 60 hertz, Victor said impatiently. "It explains why the mesh vibrates trying to find ground, like a slack rope," Thomas replied. 60 is the tone of fear on this bench." There was a second of silence. Claire crossed her arms, watching. "Let's test it," Emily said. They replaced the screw. They adjusted the torque. Thomas asked for one more thing. A lock washer. "Why?" asked Victor. "Because tired metal needs a hug that doesn't let go at the first fever." Emily suppressed a smile. She mounted it. She closed it. She turned on the system. The screens lit up. The graph rose sharply, wavered, stabilized. Claire tilted her head. Victor sucked in a breath. Emily bit her lip. "Increase the load," Thomas said softly. The load increased. 30%, 50%, 70%. The noise didn't come. The dry click didn't come either. The lines flowed like a river in good times. A technician accidentally banged his mug on the tabletop, and no one complained because no one heard it. They were trapped in the sound that was no longer there. 90%, Emily said. 100, Claire replied. They arrived. They stayed. Nothing fell. Around them, people pretending not to be watching took 2 steps closer, a camera lens timidly focused. Victor rested his fists on the counter, as if admitting without saying it. "Let's go to the dyno," Claire said, already walking. "I want the prototype on the chassis, now." The dynamometer room resembled a chapel for metal spirits. Thick glass, soundproofing, a stage of rollers that swallowed tires and returned numbers. The prototype attached to the test vehicle resembled a transplanted heart, fragile seams and high hopes. The investors sat in a row of chairs, dark suits, skeptical eyes. One of them, a gentleman with impeccable white hair, whispered something to another and crossed his legs with practiced elegance. Journalists lined up microphones, searching for the right headline. "Who's driving?" asked a technician. Victor took a deep breath, as if he were about to cross a cold river. "I'll drive," he said firmly. Thomas stood behind the glass beside Claire and Emily. The sound of the car grew from the other side, deep and clear. The numbers on the screen danced. Torque. Temperature, pressure, everything contained. Until for an instant a small hiccup appeared in the pressure curve. It wasn't the panic of before, it was a timid warning, a raised hand. "Pause," Thomas said. "It's within range," Victor replied over the intercom, a hint of defiance in his voice. "There's a lateral resonance coming from the module support," Thomas said, pointing to a piece reflected like a ghost in the glass. The new screw changed the conversation, and now the vibration has found a new ear. If it continues like this, with prolonged high rotation, the support will break. "We have 5 minutes," warned an advisor on the investor's side. Claire looked at Thomas. He already had his briefcase open, tape in hand. "We can fix it now," he said. "A rubber wedge here and a torque adjustment there. 30 seconds. Victor hesitated. His pride itched where it couldn't be reached. Emily was already opening the door. "Trust me," she said softly. The adjustment was simple, almost humiliatingly simple. A piece of rubber cut to order, the right washer in the right position, a quarter turn of torque. When they turned it back on and increased the load, the resonance disappeared like a fever that subsides in the middle of the night. "Full charge," said Claire. The car screamed beautifully. The chart became a clean drawing. On the investor's side, the crossed leg uncrossed. The white-haired man tilted his head and for the first time truly smiled. Claire didn't applaud, she just breathed, and she looked at Thomas as if recognizing something long sought after. He didn't celebrate. He put the tape away and closed his briefcase. His eyes had the gentle gleam of someone who'd just repaired an old radio for a friend. Victor turned off the engine. When he got out of the cab, He held out his hand to Thomas. "I was wrong," he said matter-of-factly. "Thank you." Thomas squeezed firmly. "It's not about being right. It's about the engine continuing to talk to us." The nearest journalist sensed the moment, but the camera remained respectful, as if it also understood the tone of the scene. "Gentlemen," said the white-haired investor, standing up, "continue. We have a breathing prototype." In the inner garden, a few minutes later, Claire pulled another envelope from her bag, this time a thick one, but she didn't offer it right away. Instead, she placed her hand on Thomas's briefcase. "That night would change destinies," she said, remembering the roadside. "I knew it, but I didn't want it to be just a nice gesture on a bad night. I want continuity. I want method." She opened the envelope. It wasn't notes, it was a contract. The paper had the weight of things that don't fly easily. "Thomas Reed, Senior Consultant, Sensory Diagnostics and Field," she read, with a small smile. "It's a strange title, but it's the most honest I've found." He scanned the lines. The benefits seemed otherworldly, salary figures that, in his mind, covered months of rent, years of rest, perhaps a roof that wouldn't creak in the slightest breeze. There was more, a bench space, access to the team, the promise that his listening skills would be part of the process. "If you say no, I understand," Claire repeated as she had in the kitchen earlier. "But if you say yes, I need you tomorrow at 7. And today, I'd like to take you home." Thomas didn't answer immediately. The late morning sun reflected in the windows, and he saw his own face duplicated, triplicated, as if the future, in different versions, stared back at him. He thought of his father, of the rent note, of the jar of coins that always sounded like thin rain. He thought of Liam's curious gaze, of the furry puppy, of the dirt road. "I only have one condition," he said finally. "Which?" "I want to stop by home first. Not to say goodbye, to pick up something from my father." Claire nodded. "The limo is where you left your sim." He smiled for the first time with all his teeth. And it was there, in that garden of glass and steel, with numbers still warm on the screens and the smell of rubber in the air, that his laughter stopped being rare. The climax wasn't the scream of the engine at full throttle. It was the quiet choice, exchanging the silence of survival for the voice of an entire profession. Because when Thomas signed, it wasn't just a contract. It was an agreement with what he'd always done, but now with a place and a name. And, as the pen scratched, somewhere in the city, a dirt road prepared to witness, the next morning, a long car pulling up in front of a simple house, and no one that night would have imagined that deep rumble would be the sound of a life shifting gears. The limousine rolled down the dirt road as if it had lost its way. Neighbors were still talking, even a day later, about the scene of the black car parked in front of Thomas's simple house. Now, seated again in the leather seat, he wasn't holding the briefcase in his lap. It rested beside him, as if he, too, were learning to fit into this world. Claire leafed through some papers, her face illuminated by the reflection in the glass. The driver kept his eyes on the road, unperturbed. Outside, children scurried around in the dust, curious about the vehicle too long for such narrow streets. Thomas stared out the window, silent. The contract he had signed just hours before felt like a folded weight in his inside jacket pocket. It wasn't just a document, it was a divider, a line separating everything he had known so far from what he could not yet imagine. "You look uncomfortable," Claire said, without taking her eyes off the paper. "I am," he admitted, "but not with the car. Or the contract, it has my name on it." She looked at him curiously. "What's in your name?" Thomas shifted on the bench, fingers intertwined. "Reed was always just a name without resonance. My father carried it like a hammer, heavy, useful, but without prestige. Now I see it on a piece of paper with numbers and promises, and I wonder if it's too big for me." Claire smiled slightly. "Names only become longer when we repeat them at the right time. You did that yesterday without realizing it." The driver entered through a side gate. The Hart Automotive Complex seemed even larger in the late afternoon light. Warehouses lined the street, concrete paths, trucks carrying parts wrapped like fragile treasures. Inside, Thomas was led to a glass-enclosed room. Unlike the technical bench, the space here exuded authority. A long table, upholstered chairs, screens displaying financial charts, and models of vehicles that hadn't yet existed. In the center, Victor Hale, impeccably groomed, adjusted his tie. "Then it's official," Victor said, unsmiling. "The consultant is hired." Thomas nodded respectfully. Claire walked to the head of the table and placed the folder on the table. "I want everyone on the same page. From now on, he'll have access to field reports and initial diagnostics. I want him to be heard before any part replacements are made." Victor cleared his throat. "Claire, with all due respect, bringing a street mechanic into the Corps, it's going to cause noise." "Noise is what we had until yesterday," she replied firmly. "Today, we had music." Silence fell. Victor didn't insist, but his eyes made it clear he wasn't convinced. Thomas remained silent, but he felt the weight of every word. He didn't want to be a source of division, but he also didn't regret his choice. After the meeting, Claire led him to a small space off the main workshop. It was simple: a workbench, a few shelves, and new tools still in their packaging. "This will be your place." Thomas set his briefcase on the counter. He ran his hand over the smooth wood. The contrast was stark, his worn keys resting next to gleaming chrome ones. He took a deep breath. "Tools don't make the man," he said almost to himself, "but a man without tools is nothing but silence." Claire approached, leaning against the doorframe. "I want you to feel like you own this space. It's not a favor, it's a necessity." He looked up. "Claire, why did you really bring me here? Not just for the prototype. There must be more." She hesitated. For the first time, her firmness wavered. "My father founded this company. Before he passed away, he said we were forgetting the basics, the sound of the engine, the smell of grease, the patience with each part." I didn't understand. I thought it was old engineer romanticism. Yesterday, when I saw you on that road, I remembered him. It was as if he was showing me what was missing. Thomas didn't answer immediately. He felt a knot form, remembering his own father, the lessons in the small workshop that was now nothing but an abandoned facade. Two men who had never met, but seemed to speak through them. "Maybe he's still showing," he said finally. Claire nodded seriously. "Perhaps." That night, Thomas returned home later than usual. The street was quiet, but not indifferent. Liam ran to the gate, panting. "Tom, everyone saw the limo yesterday. They say you got rich." Thomas laughed wearily. "Wealth doesn't come by car, Liam. It comes from within." The boy frowned, not understanding, but smiled anyway. "Can I help you tomorrow at the workshop?" Thomas looked at the small house, at the briefcase he was carrying, and then at the cards still on the table, next to the jar of coins. "Tomorrow, not here. Tomorrow, somewhere else." "Where?" "Where the engine speaks loudest." Liam's eyes widened, filled with unanswered questions. Thomas simply patted him on the shoulder. In the following days, Thomas's routine changed. He spent his mornings at the complex, surrounded by engineers, numbers, and tests. At first, the looks were suspicious. Some technicians whispered, others avoided him. But little by little, when a noise was detected, when a mysterious vibration emerged, it was Thomas who discovered the source before any software could. Emily Shaw, the tight-knit engineer, became the first to truly respect him. One morning, after he corrected a barely noticeable misalignment in the valve alignment, she said, "You don't read the data, you feel it. This isn't taught in a manual." He just smiled. Victor, however, continued to watch from afar. Each success Thomas achieved seemed to him a reminder that academic prestige wasn't enough. And the more Thomas was heard, the clearer it became that Claire was betting on him not as an exception, but as part of a new method. The weight of the Reed name was beginning to grow, not through fame, but through the quiet respect that was growing among the runners. And as Thomas returned home, he realized the jar of coins still existed, but it was no longer a symbol of survival. It was a reminder of where he had come from. But not everything was acceptance. That same week, a journalist who had attended the presentation published an article, "The Beggar of Engines, Hart Automotive Hires Street Mechanic to Save Prototype." Thomas saw the headline on a newsstand. His face burned. The article said little about what he had done and much about his humble home, his worn clothes, even Liam, his neighbor. "I painted it out of curiosity, not professionalism." When he entered the testing room, Victor had the newspaper folded on the table. "That's what happens when you mix favors with engineering," she said, looking directly at him. Thomas didn't answer. He just put the newspaper back in his briefcase. Later, Claire walked into her workbench, her gaze serious. "Don't mind them. Headlines don't build engines." Thomas looked up. "But headlines build images, and I don't want to be remembered as a joke." "Then show more than just wit. Show method." She placed her hand on his shoulder. "And leave the rest to me." He took a deep breath. He knew he was in the middle of something bigger than simple repairs. The contract was just the beginning. Now the weight of a name was at stake, and he wasn't sure he was ready to carry it yet. The headline didn't disappear from the complex. It began to circulate in silence. In the hallways, someone quickly closed their browser tab upon seeing Thomas. In the cafeteria, 2 technicians switched tables when he arrived. The folded newspaper slept at the bottom of the briefcase, but it seemed to make a constant noise. On Tuesday morning, Claire walked into the workbench with purposeful strides. She left a file on the table, grey cover, tight elastic. "Tomorrow, we have an external audit from Kroner Motors," he said. "If they approve, we'll sign a 3-year contract to supply the new thermal assembly. If they reject it, we're back to square one." Thomas opened the file. There were timelines, risk maps, protocols. Everything was clear, everything was logical. "What do you expect from me?" he asked. "That you do what you do, but with a visible method. They will demand procedure. The listener needs to become procedure." He stared at the workbench for a few seconds. The request was simple and difficult. Transform instinct into steps that fit on a spreadsheet. "I will write," he said. Claire nodded. "Victor leads the testing team. Emily stays with you." "I want a draft tonight." When she left, Thomas exhaled slowly. He picked up a lined pad, a pen that seemed too light for the weight of the task, and began. Diagnostic protocol by listening and vibration. PDV R1, preparing the environment, reduce external noise sources, align the body to the height of the piece, firm feet, slow breathing. First contact, palm on metal, measure real temperature by touch, record smell, ozone, fuel, rubber. Basic rhythm, turn on without load. Listen for patterns at low speed. Note stable frequencies, 50-70 Hz, 120-150 Hz. Load scales, climb steps. At each step, listen for transitions. Note dry clicks, relays, and long tremors. Resonance. LAN map, check meshes and attachment points. Replace short screws with long ones when expansion is likely. Guided silence. Cut the engine. Listen to the echo of the machine. What continues to vibrate points to what is not stuck. Cross-measure. Confirm everything with sensor FFT. Listening suggests, data confirms. He reread each item, adjusting verbs, cutting adjectives. Emily approached with a coffee and read over his shoulder. "I like the listening suggests, the data confirms," he said. "It will irritate some, but it's honest." "It's not poetry," he replied. "It's meant to work for anyone with patience." "Patience is the most expensive commodity in the industry." Emily smirked. "Shall we practice?" They practiced. An auxiliary motor hummed on bench 7. Thomas led Emily step by step, palm on metal, breathing, loading steps. She closed her eyes as if learning music. On the graphs, the frequencies danced. On the pad, precise notes. "Here, you hear?" He jerked his chin toward the hood. "A shadow at 180 hertz. That's the belt asking for a loosen me half a millimeter." Emily adjusted. The sound cleared. On the monitor, the line sharpened. She smiled with quiet pride. "It's teachable," he said. "The protocol, I mean." "Then tomorrow will work," Thomas replied, as if trying to convince his own nerves. Late in the afternoon, Victor appeared at the door of the workbench. He didn't go in. He stood there, arms crossed, suit stretched out. "I heard about your protocol," he said, without explicit irony. "It's here." Thomas handed over the sheet. The bug turned to footsteps. Victor read it quickly, his eyebrow moving a little. "If Kroner asks for statistical validation, it won't pass. If Kroner asks for a breathing engine, that's okay," Thomas said calmly. There was a second of spark between their eyes. Victor handed the paper back. "There's no room for improvisation tomorrow," he said, "and journalists will be in the lobby. Avoid catchphrases." "I avoid noise," replied Thomas. Victor left. Emily let out a breath that seemed to have been trapped since the door. "He's afraid," he said, "of making a mistake in front of people wearing ties. Everyone's afraid." Thomas put the protocol in a clear folder. "The difference is what we do with it." That evening Thomas walked home along the long path. The sky was low and heavy, as if it too was awaiting the audit. Liam appeared, holding his bike by just one handlebar. "Tom, tomorrow?" The boy froze, looking at the dark circles under his friend's eyes. "Are you okay?" "I am. Just concentrating." "My mom said she'll pray." Liam smiled crookedly. "She doesn't understand engines, but she understands miracles." Thomas opened the gate and touched the boy's shoulder. "Tomorrow I'll come back and tell you how miracle is written with a screw." He slept little. He dreamed of the grounding grid coming loose in slow motion and the newspaper screaming again on the newsstand. He woke before his alarm, boiled water, and ate the stale bread calmly. He took the rental receipt, crumpled with age, from his inside pocket and placed it under PDF R1 in his folder. "Remember where I came from," he wrote at the bottom of the protocol. Kroner arrived in discreet cars. 2 engineers, an auditor with wire-rimmed glasses, and a purchasing manager with impeccable posture. Victor introduced the team, the test line, and the dynamometer room. Claire drove with a firm, clear voice, without dramatization or perfume sales. Emily prepared the prototype, like someone setting up a piano before a concert. "Before the formal test, we want to watch the new diagnostic procedure," the auditor said, checking his watch. "I heard there's music involved." Someone chuckled softly in the background. Victor cleared his throat and gestured to Thomas. He remained where he was, next to bench 5. He didn't say anything nice. He explained clearly. He showed the printed PDF R1 spreadsheet, invited Emily to drive, and stood nearby to point out what was heard and measured. With each step, a camera microphone captured the engine sound, and the FFT software drew the equivalent, which the ears confirmed. "The listening suggests it," said Thomas at the end of a step of loading, "and the data confirms it." The auditor tilted his chin in interest. The manager took notes. A Kroner engineer with thinning hair and a skeptical look asked them to repeat step 4 and compare it with a reference set. They did it again. It was a success. "This doesn't replace our methods," the engineer said finally, "but it adds signal where our statistics see only noise." Thomas just nodded. Emily gave him a knowing look that was also relief. "Let's go to the dyno," Claire said. In the glass-enclosed room, the reels waited. Victor took over, as he had the day before. The numbers rose steadily, 30%, 50%, 70%. In the audience, no one was touching their cell phones. At 82% charge, a barely perceptible tremor ran through the room. Thomas felt it before he saw it. It was in the air, on the floor, in the bolt that holds the room to the world. "Pause," he said into the intercom. Victor frowned. "The sensors are perfect." "It's not a sensor. It's a side support, tray 3. It reads as nothing because it's still almost nothing." He led Emily into the technical area. Below, a metal tray supporting a duct vibrated at a pitch the FFT wasn't picking up head-on. Thomas asked for a wrench, turned the mounting point a quarter turn, and inserted a temporary rubber wedge to break the transverse resonance. "It starts at 80 and goes up by 2, he said, leaving. She went upstairs. The tremor didn't return. Claire didn't smile. She didn't even breathe louder. She just looked at the Kroner auditor, who was taking quick notes. The manager, serious, crossed her legs. 100%, said Victor. Stable. There was a brief applause, not from journalists, from technicians, the kind of applause that doesn't come out loud because they're afraid of breaking what's working. As they left the room, the skeptical Kroner engineer approached Thomas. "You called it before it appeared on the chart," he said, more curious than incredulous. "What?" Thomas thought, searching for an answer that didn't sound magical. The room speaks. The bench speaks. The pipeline speaks. When everything is right, they say, "Now it's our turn." When something is wrong, they ask for silence. The man smiled for the first time. "And you listen." He put away his pen. "We're going to recommend conditional approval for a pilot with Kroner in the field." Victor exhaled. Emily closed her eyes for a second. Claire shook the auditor's hand firmly. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "We have another stage this afternoon. A road test, 15 kilometers of climbing, high temperatures, sudden stops, no limousines this time." Claire turned to Thomas. "You go in the car," he said. "I want your ear next to the sensor." He nodded. The afternoon fell hot. The asphalt of the test track trembled on the horizon. The test car pulled out of the gate, escorted by a sedan carrying the auditors and a van carrying technicians and tools. Claire was on the radio. Victor was in the back seat, cool and precise with numbers. Emily was driving, hands steady, jaw tense. Thomas was in the passenger seat, window half open, the wind cutting through the smell of new rubber. "Step 1, Victor said. "Slight climb, 40%. The engine sang well. The landscape passed in greens and browns. At 60%, the sun seemed to push the thermometer. Emily held the line. Thomas closed his eyes instinctively, not to sleep, but to hear better. Somewhere, a different note emerged, like a vowel outside the chorus. "Stop," he said. "What?" Victor looked up from his spreadsheet. "Brake gently. Pull over." Emily obeyed. The car pulled to the side of the road. The irregular sound faded along with the revving. Thomas got out, opened the hood, and let the heat beat down on his face like a baker's oven. There was no smoke, no burning smell. There was an almost. He touched his palm to a specific spot between the thermal module and the car's body. The heat there was a crooked pattern. "Borrow me the torque bracelet," he asked Emily. She passed. 2 touches on matching screws, 1 millimeter on one, 0.5 millimeter on the other. An adjustment to a hose that curved too much. Nothing photogenic, nothing headline-grabbing, the kind of thing that saves an afternoon and doesn't make the report. "Go up again." "Same order," he said, returning to the bench. They started again. The strange note didn't return. At the top of the hill, Emily braked hard for the stopping test. Everything was as it should be. A brief jolt, obedient numbers, the smell of hot tires. On the radio, the auditor's voice. "Passed so far." Thomas glanced in the rearview mirror and for a moment saw himself with a different weight on his face. It wasn't the pride of a winner, but the peace of someone who hadn't lied. On the way back near the gate, a reporter was waiting with a microphone, the same one from the headline. His smile was practiced. "Mr. Read a word. Did the motor beggar save another day?" Victor braked. Emily tightened her grip on the steering wheel. Claire hurried forward, but Thomas held up a light hand, asking for a second. He looked the reporter in the eye. There was no anger. There was a decision. "I have a name," he said without raising his voice. "It's Thomas Reed. I listen to machines and help the people who operate those machines. If you want a headline, write that Heart Automotive listened to. And that when we listen properly, noise becomes work." The reporter wasn't expecting it. He stammered a thank you and lowered the microphone. Claire approached and, without saying anything, touched Thomas's arm as if to say, "That's it." At the end of the day, the auditors delivered their preliminary report, approved with pilot in the field. The signature would come in 2 weeks after 2 more tests. There was still a path, but now there was a path with a sign. At the workbench that evening, Thomas took the newspaper from his briefcase. He smoothed out the fold. He took out the PDEVR1 protocol and added item 8. 8. Proper name. Whoever executes is responsible for what they hear. Whoever signs is responsible for what they confirm. He kept the 2 papers together, as if a headline might one day learn from a procedure. When he left, the courtyard was empty. The city outside made its small noises. He thought about the rent note, about Liam, about his father, about Claire struggling with big names, about Victor struggling with his own pride, about Emily learning to listen. He thought about tomorrow, not as a miracle, but as maintenance. And for the first time since the headline, the silence inside him was also honest, because sometimes the greatest test isn't the one you do in front of everyone. It's the one you do in the dark, when only you hear and decide to keep the pace. The morning after the road test, the factory felt different. There were restrained smiles in the cafeteria, quick hugs in the hallways, even a shy relief in the eyes of the security guards at the gate. Kroner's preliminary report, posted on an internal bulletin board, read like a good news newspaper. But Thomas quickly realized, joy in a company is like smoke. It rises, dances, and quickly disappears. He entered his workbench early, before most. The battered canvas case rested next to the new chrome tools. He poured coffee into a cracked enamel mug. He sat down and opened his notebook. The PDEVR1 protocol was there, with item 8 written the night before. First name. He ran his finger over the words as if they were engraved in metal. "Working already, Reed?" Emily's voice sounded behind him. She held out 2 loaves of bread and held one out. Coffee without bread doesn't hold anyone back. He accepted it, biting it slowly. "The engine is still singing in my ear. I didn't sleep well." "Me neither." Emily smiled wearily, "but I'd rather lose sleep than lose a contract." Before they could continue, Victor walked in. Impeccable suit, black briefcase. Silence fell. Emily straightened. Thomas waited. "Board meeting at 10, Victor said bluntly. "Claire will present the pilot report. You, Reed, keep your mouth shut." Thomas raised his eyebrows. "If you ask me." "They won't." Victor adjusted his tie. "And if they ask, Claire will answer." Emily crossed her arms. "Don't you think the council would like to hear from the man who saved the prototype?" Victor glared at her. "The council likes numbers, and numbers don't speak with a workshop accent." Thomas was silent. Not out of fear, but because he knew that words spoken too soon become noise. The boardroom was an amphitheater of glass, polished wood, and upholstered chairs. 10 council members, dressed in expensive suits, glanced at each other. Claire stood in the center, firm. Thomas and Emily sat in the back, almost shadows. Victor, standing, projected graphs onto the screen, torque curves, efficiency tables, market forecasts. "The prototype problem was contained in record time," Victor said, his voice grave. Hart Automotive secured credibility with Kroner. The method applied, although unconventional, was documented in a preliminary protocol. One of the councillors, white hair slicked back, raised his hand. "And this method? Who developed it?" Claire replied without hesitation. "Thomas Reed." Eyes turned, murmurs. The councillor adjusted his glasses. "The same one the press called the motor beggar." Claire held his gaze. "Same, but here he's a field engineer." Victor cleared his throat, trying to pull the focus back to the screen. "The protocol is in the validation phase. I suggest caution before publicly associating Reed's name with Hart." Thomas took a deep breath. Emily's hand rested briefly on his arm, as if holding a bridle. He remained silent. Claire closed the report. "We don't need to hide our expertise. The board needs to decide. Do we want only machines that work, or do we also want the method that ensures they continue to work?" The silence that followed was heavier than noise. A young councillor with a thick beard was the first to break it. "I want results. If this Reed guy guarantees results, let him stay. But he must be trainable, publishable, replicable. We're not a neighborhood workshop." Thomas felt the sentence like a hammer in his chest. Claire nodded. "He's already making it replicable." He turned to Emily. "Confirm?" Emily stood up. "Yes, I applied the protocol myself under his supervision. It worked." Her voice was clear, unwavering. "It can be taught." The young councillor jotted something down. The white-haired one muttered, "Interesting." Victor slammed the folder shut with more force than he should have. On the way out, Claire caught up with Thomas in the hallway. "You held it well, thank you." "Keeping silent is easier than keeping a lie," he replied. She smiled slightly. "The board approved a continuation of the pilot." "But Reed," his tone turned serious, "from now on, you're on display. There will be those who want to use you as a symbol, and there will be those who want to tear you down so you don't become a symbol." Thomas looked out the window. The yard was bustling with trucks, people rushing about, and noise. "A showcase engine heats up quickly," he said. "The secret is not to let it boil." The following days were overwhelming. The field pilot required trips to the test track, late nights analyzing vibrations, and meetings with auditors. Thomas was pulled into photos, even though he was reluctant. The headline changed: "The ear that saved Hart, from the street to the council." But with fame came shadows. Specialized blogs mocked mechanical superstition disguised as science. Suppliers questioned, "Who is Reed? Why isn't he a doctor?" Inside the factory, younger technicians were divided between admiration and jealousy. One night, when he closed the counter, Thomas found an anonymous note pinned to the briefcase. "Cars aren't fixed with poetry. Get out of here before it's too late." He tucked the folded note away next to the old rent notice. 2 reminders. Debts and threats always arrive on paper. On Saturday, Claire called him early. The limo took him to a closed track outside the city. There were tents, engineers, and reporters. In the center, 3 prototypes ready for an endurance race. The event was internal, but they invited the press to set a tone of confidence. "Today is a spectacle," Claire said, "but it's also a risk. If something goes wrong in front of everyone, weeks of work will be wasted." Victor appeared at the side, clipboard in hand. "Reed, you're not on stage." The voice was firm. "Stay back. If something goes wrong, call on the radio." Thomas just nodded. Emily, already in her engineering overalls, whispered, "They want to hide you when it works and use you if it fails." He replied quietly, "It's the same with parts." The race began. Engines roared, headlights flashed. The first car ran 15 clean laps. The second, more powerful, developed a slight vibration on the 10th. Thomas felt it before the sensors could. He called over the radio, "Lower tray, left side. Adjust torque now." Victor ignored it. Seconds later, the car lost performance. The reporters noticed murmurs. Claire picked up the radio. Listen to read, make the adjustment. They did. The vibrations stopped. The car recovered, but the damage to the image was done. Journalists were frantically taking notes. When the prototype stopped, Claire walked over to Thomas. Without you, we would lose everything. But they hid me, he said without rancor, just as a statement. Victor approached, his face tense. It's not personal, Reed, it's strategy. He hesitated, but I admit, without you, we would have made the wrong headline. Thomas closed the suitcase. I don't want headlines. I want the engine running. That night at home, he opened the window and looked out onto the dirt road. Liam was playing with a flashlight, drawing circles on the wall. Hey, Tom, the boy shouted, are you a factory manager yet? Thomas chuckled softly. I'm still just an ear, Liam. Just an ear. But deep down he knew the silence of the spotlight was fragile. The pressure was mounting. The Reed name was beginning to weigh heavily on the shoulders of someone who had always carried worn-out tools. And what came next might not just be mechanical noise. Maybe it would be human noise, harder to silence. The Monday wind blew heavily in the Hart automotive lot. The sun had barely risen, but the main hallway was already buzzing with footsteps and voices. Thomas walked with his battered briefcase in hand, noticing something strange in the air. There were stares that weren't just curious. They were hard, as if expecting him to trip. On bench 5, he found Emily standing in distress before an open engine. Papers scattered, cables disconnected. What happened? He asked. The prototype that ran on Saturday? She bit her lip. Someone tampered with the records. The vibration sensors were recalibrated out of range. The report says you misdiagnosed it. Thomas frowned, picked up the report. It was there. Fake numbers, signed as if they were his. They want to turn me into noise. His voice was low, but firm. Before Emily could answer, Victor appeared in the doorway. Grey suit, frowning. The council received a copy of this, and they want an explanation. Thomas picked up the paper. This has been tampered with. Victor stared at him. I don't know, but I know trust is fragile, and you don't have the track record to sustain suspicion. Emily intervened. I was there, Victor. The sensors were correct. Reed didn't make a mistake. Victor took a deep breath, like someone carrying a weight he doesn't want. Maybe, but until you prove it, the press will devour it. He turned to leave. Get ready. The council will want your head. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. The folded newspaper inside his briefcase seemed to scream again. Beggar 2 engines. Now it wasn't just a memory. It was a threat. Sitting at the table, the dim lamp illuminating the papers, he wrote with a firm hand, The engine talks, but men lie. If I am brought down, it will not be for what I did not hear. He folded the note and put it next to the old rent notice. 3 pieces of paper. 3 phases of life. Debt, ridicule, and now sabotage. The next day, an extraordinary board meeting. Claire stood at the front, her expression tense. Victor, beside her, presented the doctored report. There's a partial load reading error here, he said, projecting it onto the screen. This compromises the credibility of the PDEV protocol. The thick-bearded councillor tapped his pen on the table. Hiring someone without a formal degree was bold. Maybe a mistake. Claire raised her voice. That's not Reed's fault. I was on the track. The car only ran thanks to him. That's testimony, not evidence, the white-haired man retorted. Kroner demands numbers. Thomas took a deep breath. He asked to speak. I don't have an engineering degree. I don't have a councillor's surname. I have heard. And I have the truth. He stared at Victor. This report has been doctored. A murmur ran through the room. The young councillor raised an eyebrow. Serious accusation. Do you have proof? Emily stood up. Yes, I was in the test. I have parallel recordings on my tablet. She turned on the device and displayed the original graphs. The curve showed the opposite of the doctored document. Silence. Claire breathed a sigh of relief. Thomas kept his eyes on Victor. "Do you want to say something?" Claire asked. Victor straightened his tie. "If there was any tampering, it wasn't my doing. But I admit that. Someone wants Reed out." The council erupted in whispers. The white-haired one raised his hand. "Until it's cleared up, keep Reed, but trust mustn't be shaken again." After the meeting, Thomas found Claire in the inner garden. She looked exhausted. "Someone is willing to do everything dirty to get you out of here," she said. "And it might not just be within the company. Kroner has rivals." Thomas leaned against the iron railing. "I'm not a politician. I only hear engines. But now I see there's more noise than just the machines." She placed her hand on his arm. "Then we need more than an ear. We need a voice." That week, rumors of the sabotage spread. Blogs accused Reed of fraud. Others called him a hunted genius. In the courtyard, technicians were divided. Some walked away, others came to secretly seek advice. Emily stood by, steadfast. One night, she found Thomas sitting on the counter, his eyes lost. "You can't let them reduce you to a rumor." "And how do I fight against what cannot be seen?" "Showing what you hear," she smiled. "Tomorrow we have another field test. Everyone will be watching. This is your chance to speak louder than the sabotage." The next day, the sky was overcast. The wind was drizzling. The circuit awaited. 3 cars, a full team, reporters, advisors, even onlookers. The atmosphere was one of judgment. Before the start, Claire pulled Thomas aside. "Reed, if you mess up today, they'll destroy you. But if you get it right, no one will silence your name anymore." He nodded calmly. "So today is not a car race. It's a real race." The engines roared. The track became wet with the first drops. The risk increased. At 60% load, one of the cars made a strange metallic sound. Everyone looked at the monitors. Nothing indicated a failure. Thomas lifted the radio. "Side tray, screw dislodged. If it continues, it will break." Victor narrowed his eyes. The councillors whispered. Claire breathed heavily. The car stopped. They checked. The screw was indeed loose, as if someone had left it that way. The crowd murmured. Claire took the microphone. "That's not a mistake. It's sabotage." And Reed saved the evidence. Flashes went off. Reporters shouted questions. Victor stared at the ground, tense. Thomas simply put away his radio, silent. That night, the news spread. Sabotage exposed. Reed saves Hart Automotive again. Headlines, blogs, photos. But for Thomas, it wasn't a triumph. It was a warning. Now I knew I was at the center of a war bigger than screws. In his simple home, he opened his briefcase. 3 papers. Debt. Old headline. Threatening note. "The engine talks, but the men," he murmured. "The men scream." Liam appeared at the door. "Tom, you won again, didn't you?" Thomas looked at the boy. He smiled wearily. "No, Liam. I just didn't let them lie louder than the engine. But deep down, I knew. The final test was yet to come. And in it, listening wouldn't be enough. I would have to choose who to trust." The rain began before dawn, fine, persistent, tapping on the roofing sheets like impatient fingers. Thomas arrived at the complex earlier than anyone else. The courtyard was still asleep. Only the glass lobby cast a milky light over the puddles. He opened his workbench, turned on the lamp, and stood there, breathing in the smell of cold metal. He wanted silence before the din of the day. The silence, however, was not complete. A barely perceptible sound drifted down the hallway, a hiss that was unusual. Thomas closed his eyes. It was compressed air escaping at regular intervals, like someone using a pneumatic device too early. He followed the sound like a thread. In Warehouse 3, the light was on. As he approached, he saw the shadow of a body hunched over the sensor bench. The compressor valve sighed. Ch, 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 in a rhythm he knew by ear. "It's too early for repairs," Thomas said without raising his voice. The man started. It was Nolan Briggs, outsourced technician, badge hanging crooked, eyes darting. He tried to hide something in the pocket of his coveralls. "Just checking calibration," he murmured. "Victor's order." "Victor sends it by email." Thomas pointed to the tablet on the counter. The screen was dark. "And that's not how you calibrate. That's how you decalibrate." Nolan swallowed hard. The silence in the room weighed heavily. The rain seemed to bring the sounds closer together. Thomas walked slowly to the bench and saw the trail of what had been done, a micro-leak of air forcing the sensor into a constant, subtle deviation, enough to turn a hit into a miss. In the trash can, a freshly torn piece of Torque-lac tape. "Who paid you, Nolan?" Thomas asked, still calm. "I'm not a cop. I just want to stop the noise." Nolan tried to keep his chin high, but his voice came out thin. "Do you think this act of yours will last?" He smiled crookedly. "There are big people wanting you back on the streets. I just do what they tell me." "Who?" The door creaked. Victor came in. There was no scene. He walked over, picked up the tape from the trash, and held it up to the light. "It's my color," he said quietly. "I mixed it on Friday. Scheduled it to see who would stop by at dawn." He looked at Nolan with an old, weary look. "Thanks for confirming." Nolan took a step back. You set me up?" "No, you set yourself up when you sold the badge." Victor made a dry gesture. 2 security guards appeared at the door. "We'll talk in the room, on the record." Nolan still tried one last attack, targeting Thomas. "You think you're a hero?" he spat. "You're nothing but a lucky beggar. When this trend dies down, no one will remember you." Thomas just shook his head. "Fashion passes. The engine needs to run again tomorrow." They took Nolan. Victor remained, breathing like someone coming down from a long run. The rain eased. "I suspected," he said finally, "ever since the first doctored report. Torque-lac marking is an old trick, but it catches those who trust their trick too much." Thomas waited. This wasn't the time for "I told you so." "The money came from abroad," Victor continued. "Thermosys components. They lost the bid for the modules. They used a middleman, paid Nolan, and pushed the story to the press through that clever reporter." He narrowed his eyes. "And in here, someone left the door open." "Who?" Victor looked at the floor. "I don't know yet, but it wasn't Claire." He took a deep breath. "Today we'll have a demonstration for the board and Kroner. Everything is open. I want it to work without any tricks." Thomas pointed his index finger at his ear, smiling out of the corner of his eye. "That's my trick. We'll tighten the rest." The makeshift auditorium in the main warehouse smelled of something big. Black cables on the floor, projectors, microphones testing 1, 2, 3. Cameras waiting for mishaps. The rain had turned to drizzle. Claire walked with the measured pace of someone who doesn't allow the world to set the pace. "Updates?" he asked, going straight to Victor. "Nolan arrested. Evidence collected. There's a trace of a transfer to a consulting firm linked to Thermosys." Victor ran his hand over his face. "I still need to find out who on the board leaked the emails to the press." Claire nodded, eyes hard. "First, we show our work. Then, we show our teeth." Emily arrived in overalls, hair tied up, eyes warm. "Read. We've reviewed the entire line. Talk laced at critical points. Any improper handling, shout to the camera." Thomas smiled. "Today, the engine is the one talking. We just translate." The audience started to arrive. Advisors, auditors, journalists, including the one from the old headline, suppliers and curious onlookers. Liam appeared beside the gate, small among the adults, visitor badge swinging on his chest. "I asked permission," he said with shy pride. "I want to see you do the magic." "Not magic," Thomas replied, running his hand through the boy's hair. "Method, but the glow is similar." Claire stepped up to the podium. Her voice cut through the room with the clarity of someone rehearsing the truth. Today we're opening our home. We're going to show you what we did, how we did it, and why we'll keep doing it. He glanced sideways at Thomas. And we're also going to show you that listening is technology. The testing began. One prototype was on the dynamometer, another on a transparent bench with exposed sensors, a third on a short track set up in the yard, covered by a tent. Everything was broadcast on a large screen. The revised PDIV-01 protocol appeared on signs nearby. Simple steps, clear language. Emily drove the bench test, Victor, the dyno test, Thomas, the short track test, the one that most closely resembled the roadside. At his post, Thomas called for silence, palm on metal, breath, steps. The room slowed down with him. The microphone picked up the raw sound. On the screen, the FFT corroborated. Signals and sounds danced together as if they had always belonged together. At 75% charge, in Victor's car, a sideways vibration hinted at his head. Thomas lifted the radio slowly. Tray 3, side support, quarter turn, torque lack still intact. Victor responded with a curt, "Okay," adjustment made, muted excitement. The journalists pointed their cameras, frustrated that they had no drama to film. That's when the twist came from the side. The thickly bearded counselor, the same one who days earlier had asked for replicable, publishable, approached Claire with an overly polite smile. A man in a dark blue suit followed suit. Thomas recognized the logo on his tie clip, Therma Size. "Miss Hart," the counselor said, loud enough for nearby microphones to pick up, "I hope the show is convincing. I've brought in an outside consultant to evaluate the music." Claire didn't back down. "The music is in-house," he replied firmly, "and the consultant we need is over there." The man in the blue suit extended his hand to Thomas theatrically. Marcus Vale, COO of Thermosys Components. The smile was of someone betting against and intending to profit anyway. "I heard your protocol is unpublishable." Thomas held the hand for a second and let go without squeezing. "I heard you pay technicians to silence sensors." The buzz erupted. Marcus maintained his smile, but his eyes hardened. Serious accusations for a, what do you call him, listener. "I have another word," Thomas said, pointing to the screen. "Trial." Victor played the short video captured earlier. Nolan in the early hours, the marked torque lack tape, the tires sighing untimely. The image of the security guards, Victor's voice saying, "The color is mine." Noted ye, and then the blurry bank statement, but with enough, the name of the fake consultancy, the final destination crossing with a technical support contract from Thermosys. The room erupted in voices. The bearded counselor turned white. Marcus looked around, searching for an exit that didn't exist. Claire stepped forward. "Hart Automotive doesn't outsource ethics," she said dryly. "Safety, please." Marcus tried to make up a speech. He couldn't. He was escorted out under flashbulbs that this time were aimed precisely. The bearded counselor sat slowly, small in the large chair. "The council will vote on your continued presence," Claire said to him without raising her voice. "After the test." The test continued, and it was beautiful, not because it was a spectacle, but because it actually worked. At the end, the Kroner auditor stood up, without any theatrics. "Approved. Full contract." He removed his glasses, as if lifting a weight. "And I recommend that the PDV protocol be part of the knowledge transfer package, with its author named." There was real applause, not loud, but full. Emily hugged Thomas without asking permission. Victor, for a second, seemed to forget where his hands were. Then he shook Thomas's sincerely eye to eye. "I was wrong about you," he said, his voice low. "I was wrong about you," Thomas replied. "I thought you'd take the shortcut." "I almost preferred it." Victor smiled wearily. "Thanks for reminding me of the way." Claire stepped back onto the podium. Her face was more flushed than it had been in weeks. "Before we close, I have two things to announce." He pointed to the screen, where the title appeared, Read Program, School of Listening and Diagnosis. Starting today, we will train technicians, engineers and suppliers in the PDEV method, because listening is a skill, and it has a name. Thomas felt his chest warm. It wasn't fame, it was place. "And the second," Claire continued, "we'll rename this bench." Light on Thomas's bench. The new sign glowed. Bancada Reed, in memoriam, Arthur Reed. The world blurred slightly. Thomas blinked twice. His father's name seemed to pull a thread that tied everything together. The small workshop, the canvas suitcase, the roadside, the dynamometer, the rain on the sheet metal. Liam clapped his hands as big as his body, happy and unable to contain his joy. By the end of the day, the rain had stopped. The limousine was waiting at the gate, just as it had been the first morning. Claire approached with a simple envelope. "For Mrs. Turner," he said. "Rent paid off for 1 year, and an advance from you in your account. No favours, no spectacle, just justice." Thomas held the envelope like water. He smiled. "Can I walk?" he asked, pointing to the street. "You can," Claire laughed, "but the limo will follow you from a distance, just to annoy those who don't like to hear a story well told." He walked with the canvas suitcase bumping against his knee, Liam skipping alongside, Emily a few steps behind, Victor at the gate, hands in his pockets, watching. The sky was opening up a blue streak. On the way they passed a billboard, Heart Automotive. "Engineering that feels." Thomas read it, and for the first time, thought the sentence wasn't an empty promise. At the corner, he pulled from his pocket the papers he'd always kept. He examined each one in the new afternoon light, the crumpled rent note, the clipping of the old headline, the anonymous threatening note, folded, tucked away. Then he pulled out another piece of paper, a new badge, with a photo, a name, and a title that sounded strange but true. Thomas Reed, Senior Diagnostic Consultant. "What's up, Tom?" Liam pointed to his badge, eyes shining. "Is this boss?" "No," Thomas replied, pinning his badge to his shirt. "It's just someone who keeps listening." The limousine stopped discreetly, half a block behind. In front of the simple house, Thomas saw Mrs. Ruth smiling at the gate, the shaggy dog wagging its tail, people in the windows who now looked not with pity, but with good-natured curiosity. He held out the envelope to Mrs. Turner, who wiped her tears with the hem of her apron. "We pay on time, starting today," he said. "From today onwards," she repeated, as if sealing an old agreement. As night fell, no headline was more valuable than the small sound of the kettle rising, the sound of bread tearing, Liam's laughter as he told them he'd seen it all. Thomas leaned his briefcase against the corner, ran his hand along the tabletop, the same one that had been the bench, the debt, the waiting. Now, it was time to start. The world would remain noisy. There would be new parts to adjust, new human noises to silence. But he had learned. The note that betrays also points the way. And as long as there were machines to listen and people to not lie, there would be work, there would be method, there would be a name. "Good night, Dad," he said, voiceless, looking at the sign on the counter that only existed in his memory at that moment. And yet it rang. "I'll be home early tomorrow. We have a lot to hear."